Ellen Shepard. I'm an outreach manager with the New Buildings program, and I am so happy to be here with you today. As an outreach manager, I have the privilege of serving as a liaison among our program staff, such as the engineers that we'll hear from today, and design teams, including many of whom I see here today on our call. As Kriya said, I am the whole building subject matter expert on the team, and I see many projects go through the whole building pathway, and I love to help guide them through the process every step of the way. The whole building pathway is a holistic approach to your building performance that can result in the highest level of incentives and energy savings. That pathway connects to the whole building offering, which we'll talk about today. It requires an energy model to capture the interactive savings within a building and uses the results of that model as the basis for the incentive calculations. And we're going to dig into all of that today. So the agenda that you see on the screen here focuses on detailed information around the development of the new building offering and the savings methodology as a result of the updated energy code. And Phil's going to tell us all about that. And then Corey will give you a rare peek behind the curtain of the energy modeling summary workbook, including 2 demonstrations that will allow you to see the back end of the tool. This is a very deep dive that will speak specifically to energy modelers. However, please remember that myself and your outreach managers are always here to help you with any questions. And hopefully, many of you know who your outreach managers are, but if you don't, please feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to help. Maybe we can drop my email in the chat and feel free to reach out to me. We plan to have a very robust Q&A at the end of this session, and I look forward to all your questions. I'm going to be facilitating that Q&A, maybe with my camera off as a disembodied voice, but I'll be happy to keep that moving. Please feel free to add them, to add your questions to the question feature throughout the session. You'll see it at the top of your screen. It's a little question mark in the square there. And we'll capture your questions to discuss at the end. However, we do value confidentiality of projects. So please, I do ask that you don't identify specific projects in your questions. Please just keep your questions general. All right, so now it's my pleasure to introduce your speakers for the day, Phil Jordan and Corey Fulton. They're both engineers on the new buildings team, and they actively review energy models as well as they both worked on the updates to the whole building offering and the energy modeling summary workbook for the 2025 code. So you really do have the experts here. They're going to take you into a very deep dive into these updates, including a detailed demonstration of the energy modeling summary workbook. So let's pull up our sleeves and get ready to dig in. So Phil, I'll pass it over to you.
Perfect. All right, thanks, Ellen. Hi, everybody. My name is Phil Jordan. I'm an engineer on the Energy Trust New Buildings program. And I'll be talking through the updates to the MSW that Ellen just mentioned. I'm going to be covering some dense information. So just want to remind everybody, we're recording this presentation. And so that'll be available to you all afterward if you need to revisit that. And like Ellen mentioned, we're having a demo of the EMSW that will hit on a lot of the information I'll be covering through some examples. And we'll have time at the end of the presentation for questions. And if anything is unclear or you think of a question afterwards that you didn't get a chance to ask today, you can always reach out to us, to the program, either through your outreach manager or contact us through the New Buildings webpage or the contact info that they've put in the chat. And so let's get into these EMSW updates. And so the first being that the EMSW now covers all code years in one version of the tool. And so in prior versions of the offering, we had a separate EMSW Excel file, depending on which code year the project was permitted under. But we've simplified that and combined multiple Oregon Energy Code cycles into the EMSW. So that includes 2019, 2021, and the 2025 Oregon Energy Codes. Note on that, the projects that have already received an incentive reservation letter, those will remain in the legacy version of the EMSW that they were reserved under. But going forward, any project that has yet to submit an EMSW with model results will use this latest version that we're covering today. And I also wanted to mention that technical guidelines associated with the whole building offering are available as a separate Word document. And that document also covers all the code years, and it contains guidance for participating in the whole building offering. That includes information that we're covering today in the presentation. And so that can be a really useful reference to know how to access. And as far as that, both of these, the EMSW and the technical guidelines, can be found on our forms and resources page of the new buildings website at energytrust.org at the web address shown on the slide. And so there you can find and download the EMSW, the whole building technical guidelines, and some additional whole building incentive forms and resources. All right, next I want to talk about the incentive tiers and some changes to those. But first, a reminder on the structure of the incentives for the whole building offering. Incentives are paid out based on annual estimated energy savings. So we have electric incentive rates in dollars per kWh savings, and natural gas incentive rates in dollars per estimated therm savings. And the incentive structure is tiered, and it follows a good, better, best model. And the EUI of the proposed design building is what determines which tier you've achieved. So for each of these tiers, the lower you're able to drive that EUI down of your proposed design, the better chance you have at achieving the higher incentive tier. As far as the tiers, we're maintaining the minimum incentive tier, which is called whole building efficient. And we've added a mid-range tier. So this is new. And we did this for a couple of reasons. One being that we wanted to align this whole building offering with some of our other new buildings offerings, such as market solutions. But more importantly, we wanted to allow teams that are striving for energy efficiency but aren't quite able to meet the path to net zero targets to still be rewarded for achieving an enhanced level of efficient design. And then we are still maintaining the path to net zero incentive tier, which that's the highest amount offered, and therefore that one's associated with the most aggressive EUI targets. An important note here, this is also something new, and that is that offsets from renewables are no longer counted towards EUI achievement. And this decision was made to focus this whole building offering on improvements coming from energy efficiency. So, renewables are still an important part of efficient buildings. We encourage teams to pursue renewables, but incentives for renewables are handled through other means at Energy Trust. And for this particular offering, for this whole building offering, the focus is on driving the EUI down through energy efficient design strategies. And because of that, because we're no longer considering renewable offsets, the EUI targets for each incentive tier have been adjusted to account for this. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how the EUI targets are set. A requirement of this offering is that early on, project teams need to set a goal EUI that they're aiming to achieve through their design. And to help with this target setting, the EMSW provides EUI estimates. It does this early in the design process before you even might have energy modeling results available. So all you need to start is some basic information that gets entered into the project description tab of the EMSW. And that would include like the building type and the location just from the zip code. And with that, the EMSW automatically shows the estimated code minimum EUI. And again, this is before energy modeling results are even available. And this estimated code minimum EUI is meant to aid project teams in setting their target, because it provides a benchmark from which you can gauge how well your design might do. And at this point, the EMSW would also set the target EUIs for each of the incentive tiers and show those in the tool. The targets were developed by the program for the most common participating building types based on historical program participation. So for the building types listed on the slide, those include education buildings, offices, libraries, and multifamily buildings. The EMSW sets the EUI targets for those building types automatically. Even with that, there is some flexibility on those. So in cases where the proposed model results might vary drastically from the historical projects that inform these targets, we can work with your project on that. The targets can be adjusted accordingly, but ideally, the tool should be able to set EUI targets without any intervention for these common building types. But for all other building types, a zero tool output is needed in order to estimate the EUI targets. Zero tool is a third-party tool. It's web-based, and it's developed by the Architecture 2030 group. And the EUI information from that is used by the EMSW to estimate the EUI targets. So there's a section in the zero tool output where it provides an EUI of a typical building based on the building information you've entered. And that EUI output that's indicated in the little red box here on the slide, that's what's needed for entry into the EMSW. And then once modeling results are available, once the energy models are created and that the output from those are put into the EMSW, there may be an adjustment to the EUI targets to align with the model output. And that's because before any model results are entered, the tool is really only providing estimates, like a prediction of where the results may land. And so there may need to be a readjustment once that model output is available. Whoops. All right. So the EMSW also has a section to capture information related to technical assistance that's being applied for the project. And that section is still there. And we have a new type of technical assistance included in there. And so we thought this would be a good chance to share some information related to this new type of assistance for future ready buildings. So regional electricity demand is expected to increase in the next decade. And so planning and designing for demand flexibility is becoming more important. And these new incentive offerings for future ready buildings can help you future proof your building to meet requirements like Oregon's upcoming building performance standards. And they can also provide insight on how to design systems that can take advantage of certain financial opportunities like demand response programs and avoiding higher utility time of use rates. And these new incentives include the following shown here on the slide. So we have a $500 add-on available at the early design assistance meeting for having a discussion of potential grid interactive features for the project. There's a $3,000 technical assistance incentive for preliminary demand analyses, and then up to $10,000 for more in-depth analysis. And the incentive dollars can be used to study any demand-related equipment or strategy like PV and battery storage systems, or thermal storage, or grid interactive controls. And so those are all available to you all now. And stay tuned for additional future-ready building incentives to come as the program further develops this feature of the whole building offering. And you can always ask your outreach manager for more details on these forward-looking offers. All right, so it was mentioned in the agenda too that there are updates to the savings determination that's performed by the EMSW. So I want to spend a little time now talking about that and why that is. And I'll start by saying that historically, the way you determine savings from a modeled approach is that the uh, the energy modeler would create a scenario that aligns with code that would serve as the baseline. So that would be the code minimum baseline scenario. And there'd be a model created reflective of the building design, and that would be the proposed scenario. And the savings would be the difference between those two scenarios, between the modeled consumption for each of those. So pretty straightforward. Uh, then the energy code changed in the 2016 version of ASHRAE 90.1, which was the basis for 2019 Oregon Energy Code. And through that, a new approach was set up for the performance rating method, the PRM, which is a modeled pathway for code compliance, also called Appendix G. And under that new approach, the baseline scenario now going forward represents a static version of 90.1. And it represents the 2004 version of the standard. So under the 2004 version, energy efficiency requirements weren't as strict as they are today. So we would expect the energy consumption under 2004 version to be higher than it is today. And so the way the EMSW handles this is it applies duration factors to that 2004 Appendix G baseline scenario to adjust the consumption to what it would be for the year, the standard that we're working under. And so that's what's depicted here in the right hand graphic on the slide in that little dashed box. That's what the MSW is doing to the 2004 Appendix G baseline scenario. It's derating it to a level of consumption we'd expect for the standard of today. And then the result of that is what the EMSW uses as what we call the program baseline for determining savings. And the rest of the savings determination process is the same as the historical approach. So we still have a proposed model that reflects the design, and then the savings is the difference between the program baseline and that proposed scenario. And this is all performed within the EMSW. And there are a few adjustment factors to talk about as far as how the EMSW adjusts that Appendix G baseline consumption. So the first is that the EMSW uses end use adjustment factors. It doesn't apply a factor just at the whole building level. Um, it derates the Appendix G consumption at the site energy end use level. So as shown here in the graphic on the slide, for way of example, we have Appendix G baseline consumption shown in the leftmost stacked column chart. This is for a multifamily example building. And we can see that orange heating end use there at the top. It's kind of large. It's expected consumption under 2004 version of the standard, and it's having an end use adjustment factor applied to it that derates it down to what we'd expect the consumption to be under the 90.1 2022 version of the standard. And that's done for all the end uses. Different adjustment factors are applied to each end use to arrive at an overall adjusted consumption. And the result should line up with code minimum for what we'd expect under the current version of code. And all of this I've shared so far on the savings determination, that's true in the legacy versions of the EMSW, and it's still true in the updated version. All that's being maintained. But what's changed is where these end use adjustment factors come from. This part is new. So historically, the program had determined those factors. We had computed them. But going forward, we're going to be using factors from the Department of Energy's Appendix G companion tool. And that's just to provide a source for where the factors come from. I'm not saying that applicants need to use the companion tool in any way. You don't for participation in the offering. This is just for information that that's where we've pulled our end use adjustment factors from, except for the following cases. We've added a multiplier of 1.05 for major renovation projects, and that's consistent with 90.1. That's there to give some leniency to existing buildings that have a little less control over changes they might be able to make versus ground up construction, mostly related to envelope. And secondly, we've also developed 2025 code specific end use factors for space heating for multifamily buildings. And that's because of Oregon amendments to 90.1. With the 2025 Oregon Energy Code, one of the Oregon amendments to 90.1 is that heat recovery is no longer required in most dwelling units. And so we've accounted for that and adjusted the space heating end use factor for multifamily accordingly. So it's a little less stringent than it would have been if heat recovery were required. And regarding all this, one of the best updates to the EMSW, I think, is that all of this is visible in the EMSW. Within the detailed results tab, you can see the factors that are being applied to your Appendix G baseline scenario. You can see the steps on how that's being done. And so we've added this increased level of transparency into the tool, and that's available in the detailed results tab. And you'll see that demonstrated in just a bit here once we get to the live demo, which we're almost at. But I do have one other thing to cover regarding the an update to the savings determination. And that is with this latest version of the EMSW, we've added a potential adjustment step that's related to fuel type. And that's because with the Appendix G baseline, ASHRAE 90.1 dictates the fuel choice that's used in the baseline scenario. But for your proposed design, you're free to use whichever fuel type you feel is appropriate for your building. So we have an additional set of factors related to accounting for scenarios where the proposed fuel type differs from that of the Appendix G baseline scenario. And these factors are designed to account for the minimum code required efficiency of the equipment using the same fuel as the equipment in the proposed design. So what does that mean? Let's go through an example. Let's say the project specifies air source heat pumps in the proposed design, but Appendix G baseline rules specify the use of natural gas heating. And in that case, an additional factor would be applied by the EMSW that accounts for the performance of the heat pumps specified in the design relative to a minimally code compliant heat pump. This additional factor, it's really a ratio of COPs So it's a ratio of the minimally code compliant COP of each fuel type. So if we stick with this example, let's say the minimally code compliant efficiency for gas heating equipment is about 80%. And for a heat pump, it might be on the order of a COP of 3. Then the fuel adjustment factor in that case could work out to 80% divided by 3. It's about 27%. And that would further derate the Appendix G baseline heating consumption by that amount. These fuel adjustment factors, they're only applied to those end uses where a fuel change could occur between the proposed design and Appendix G baseline. And those end uses are space heating, domestic water heating, and space cooling. And space cooling because there could be gas-powered cooling equipment in the design, whereas Appendix G baseline rules specify electricity for cooling in Oregon in the baseline scenario. And so I think that's it for me as far as description of updates to the EMSW. I know that was a lot, but we're going to hand it over now to Corey, who's going to do a live demo of the tool. And so that, hopefully that'll further demonstrate a lot of what I've just gone over. So let's turn things over to Corey.
Okay, thank you so much, Phil, for that great explanation of things, to the changes in the MSW as well as our new whole building offering for this new code year. I wanted to start by reminding everyone you do have a Zoom tool down on the right-hand side of your go-to meeting window if you need it to take a closer look at any of the tables or information that I'll be sharing. And what I'll be covering is basically first we'll look at the more simple, straightforward input tabs on the tool, and then we'll kind of dig into the back end of an EMSW that's been filled out with energy modeling results. So let's go ahead and dig in. What I'm showing you here is the introduction tab for the EMSW. Of note is the key at the top, a color key that gives you some idea of what the different cells mean in each of the tabs. There's also a lot of references and additional information down here in the bottom of this tab, including some information about the Zero tool that Phil spent some time on just a couple of minutes ago. All right, and I want to also stress up front that we've said this many times. If you have questions about this tool or results that you're seeing in this tool, please don't hesitate to reach out to your outreach manager. Our engineering team is happy to meet with projects. We recognize this is a new, more complicated code year, and it's a new tool designed to match that code. So we're very interested in hearing feedback from folks and how this tool is working for your projects. So don't hesitate to reach out. All right, so project description tab is the first tab you want to look at. You'll see up at the top here, there's a reminder of the code year that's been selected. Nothing's been selected so far. We do ask you fill out these basic information tabs up here. If they're blank, it won't prevent the tool from doing its calculations, but we do appreciate the information. If you don't know your Energy Trust project ID number, you can ask your outreach manager, or we'll look and make sure that that's filled out when we take a look at your EMSW after submission. The building location section is quite important. It has several factors that need to be filled out. The zip code is important, as Phil mentioned, to determine your climate zone that's going to be applied, which the end use factors are climate zone dependent. The Oregon Energy Code, you want to make sure you're selecting the proper code for your project. And then these little entries over here are basically asking you to fill out if your utility is eligible for the Energy Trust programs. And it's important to note these because if they're left blank or they're marked as no, then the incentives that would otherwise be calculated for that fuel type will not be included. So generally, most projects are going to want to make sure these both say yes. So you're going to see 0 incentives when you get to the results. Okay, moving on to the estimation of the incentive tiers. Now, I want to stress that at this point, before any energy modeling results have been put into the tool, these are all estimates. They're just trying to give you, the project team, an idea or some baseline benchmarking information that can help you maybe set your design targets for your building. However, once you start entering modeling data into this tool, you're going to want to instead take a look at at the tiers, the EUI tiers that are established on the Savings and Incentives tab. So the estimates of the tiers and the different efficiency tier EUI targets that are shown here, once you've got some information in here, are just early design values and should not be, they can basically be ignored once you start entering modeling data into the tool. There's a spot to enter your early design UI. This is necessary. If you leave it blank, it'll be read as a 0, and most projects don't have a 0 design target EUI, so make sure you have a value here for your project. The tool will give you an estimated code baseline EUI, and as Phil talked about, that's going to be determined either through program experience with existing projects for those 5 common building types, or it's going to be partially based on some information that you'll provide, CBEX information either from the Zero tool or other CBEX sources. There's a baseline override, which I'll talk about in a little while. An estimated tier, this gives you an idea of what tier the tool is estimating your project will achieve based on your early design target and any of that CBEX information if you've been asked to put that in there. Over here on the right-hand side of this section, you'll see once the tool is filled out, you'll see the actual EUI targets. So it's clearly defined for each of the 3 incentive tiers: the whole building efficient, the high performance target, and the highest path to net zero target. Another important thing to note are the notes at the bottom of this tab. They relate mostly to these items over here, so it's good to read these, especially if you've not read them at least one time before, to give you a reminder of how to use these inputs to the most effective way. Now, one thing I want to also mention is that there is some information down here that you want to make sure is filled out completely. You're not done with this section up here until this stuff down here is also filled out. So enter your number of stories for the building. You're going to want to enter your building type, and you can enter up to 3 different building types. And the types that are available are the ASHRAE 90.1 building types. You'll want to enter the square footage for each project. And then the construction type is important because Phil mentioned that renovation projects get a little bit of a bump, a little bit of forgiveness on those end use factors. So you want to make sure you're specifying if your project is new construction or major renovation. If this is left blank, it will assume that it's new construction. But if it's a renovation, you definitely want to make sure you're checking off major renovation here. And finally, there's a little bit more information about this here. And we asked the project teams give us an idea of there's a spot here to put in some overall project information that might be helpful for us on understanding your project as we're going through and doing a review of the model. And then if we also look to these key design strategies for lighting and envelope and HVAC systems, for the service water heating process loads. And then renewables, understanding that renewables no longer contribute to getting to that path to net zero target. This information can still be very useful for your outreach manager to make sure we're giving you support and whatever reference information we can for the solar program that Energy Trust runs, where renewables can generate incentives for your project. Okay, so we're going to fill all this stuff out here in a little while, so I'm not going to fill it out yet. Well, I should also mention, once you do fill this out, there's a nice kind of chart here that gives you a stacked bar chart, and it gives you an idea of where all the tiers are and where your project is on an EUI basis, and we'll get to that in just a moment. The technical assistance tab, Phil mentioned this. We asked for some basic information up here on the energy modeling. We kind of want to know when you think you might have the model submitted to us. We like an idea of the effort that's going to take for you to do the model. Is an estimated effort with a not to exceed cost. and then also some idea of what software you intend to use for the project. And down here, if you're interested in accessing other technical assistance incentives, you can check off these boxes. And Phil mentioned in particular the future ready building, new future forward looking technical assistance. This technical assistance incentives are offered over and above the project cap that some of you may know about. There's been a $40,000 cap on technical assistance for individual projects. These two offers represent an additional $13,000 of incentives that can be accessed. And then there's also the more classic studies that people are familiar with, daylighting studies, natural ventilation, and you can provide some information about these that will help your outreach manager guide you in the right direction. Okay, the modeling results tab is basically where you're going to be filling out your model results once you have them. We like to see exactly what modeling software you did use, as well as the version over here. You can write in something else that's not here. It'll just ask you, are you sure you want to do this? This isn't in the list. And you can say, yeah, sure, and enter whatever the name of your software is if you don't see it on the list. This section here can be very helpful to us if you've done any significant modeling workarounds or post-modeling massaging of the data through spreadsheets or something like that. If you can give us a heads up that you're doing those kinds of things, that can really speed the review and let us zero in on those things right from the get-go. If you have any significant error warnings that are going to pop up when we run your model, when we're about to review it, it's helpful if you can add any comments about those, if you think those would be helpful, again, to help us do your review in a more speedy fashion. We do ask for the unmet hours, and those must be under 300 hours for both the baseline and proposed model, and then some idea of the quantity of error messages you're seeing. And then, of course, down here we have the consumption results from your Appendix G model go in these for your 4 rotations. You can simply have these all be the same for projects where it's appropriate to not do multiple rotations. And then over here, we have the proposed modeling consumption results. So again, a reminder, once you've entered this data into the tool, you're going to want to look at your EUI targets and incentive levels that are showing up on this tab, not the project and description tab. So again, the code year is reflected up here to remind you which one you've selected. There's a table that summarizes and reflects back your Appendix G model results, your proposed model results, and the calculated program baseline consumption, which is essentially your prescriptive baseline. Savings are shown over here. This chart appears in regulated and unregulated format with some EUIs at the bottom, which is kind of helpful. Once you fill out your modeling information, you'll see the tiers and incentive levels are mentioned, or excuse me, the incentive levels, incentive rates, pardon me, are populated in this table. And then you'll see a bunch of summary information about your actual project, including the tier that your project has actually achieved. I mentioned here the early design target is just reflected from the project description tab for informational purposes only, to see, hey, this is what we were thinking back at early design, and how does it compare to how our model actually did. It's just there for reference. It shows you the applied incentive rates and then the calculated total incentives for each fuel type and then for the project as a whole. And then this chart will show a version of this where this is all filled out so you can see what's in this chart. Okay, and detailed results, we're going to go into all of this in a little while, so I'm not going to cover this yet, but just to let you know it is there and we'll be looking at it. The scratch pad is a great place to put any kind of calculations you need to. If you need to break out your modeling results, your raw modeling results, you can link this tab to your modeling results page if you need to, or really whatever you want to do. That's why it's called the scratch tab. And then another addition, what we think is a helpful addition to this new version of the EMSW is the tech review comments. Many of you know we used to have a tech review memo that we would use as a separate spreadsheet where we tracked comments that we made on the model and your project team's responses back to us. we've put that functionality into the EMSW itself. We figured it'd be one less spreadsheet to keep track of and might be helpful and streamline things a little bit. We probably will be making some changes to this. Currently, there are formulas in here, which we're going to get rid of. So it's very clear that you do want to enter your responses here and your initials and date here. So look for a new version of the MSW that will include those basic things. Okay, now we're going to go into a filled out version of the EMSW. And again, I'll stress, if your project is seeing unexpected results or has questions about the tool or the results you're seeing, reach out to your outreach manager. Our engineering team is super happy to talk with people and make sure everything's working the way it should, and keep an eye out for any potential issues. So let's switch over to our next demonstration, EMSW. So one thing I did want to go back to is I talked about a baseline EU override, or mentioned it. We didn't talk about it. This is a value that can be entered by you if you think that the automatically calculated baseline here is just not quite right for your project. You can simply override that value with what you think the appropriate baseline EUI would be, and the tool will adjust itself accordingly. That's purely for, if you think the tool's not doing a good job of calculating your baseline, which is gonna happen for some projects, especially those projects where they don't have a real clear correlation to the Appendix G building types. That is why that is there. And associated with that is building types that Phil mentioned that our program has a lot of experience with, the 5 building types: college, library, office, school, and I'm forgetting one other. Those will see this section looks kind of like this. But if you pick one of the types that we don't have experience with, I'm just going to pick all others, because that is an Azure building type. It's a building type population density weighted EUI averaging of all these other building types. But the point being, you'll see these additional input fields come in over here. And this is where we ask for that information from the Zero tool, or if you feel like you'd rather dig into the CBEX data yourself and do a raw analysis, we are happy to look at those results. The EUI for that CBEX estimation should go in this column. And then the Zero tool type is just, if you did use the Zero tool, and you use one of the building types from the Zero tool, you'll see all those building types are in here from the Zero tool. If you can just let us know which one you used, that's helpful. And if you do that in addition to sending us a copy of the PDF printout, that's also super helpful. And then just to kind of take a gander, this is what the tab looks like after you've had all the information is in there. Again, this is the early design targeting EUIs and the tiers that are met and the estimation of what you think your project will meet. This is before modeling results have been entered in the tool. However, this EMSW has modeling results in it. So these results here, we don't need to worry about anymore. What we want to look at are the results that we're seeing in the savings and incentives tab. And you can see that let me go back, because I know I forgot to change this back to our school example. And back to detailed results, or I'm sorry, to savings and incentives. You'll see the 3 incentive tier EUIs are shown here on the chart. The project achieved EUI is shown here. The Oregon code EUI is shown here. So this can be some nice summary information that you see. This project's meeting or getting to whole building efficient. Let's see, I think that's all we wanted to go on with this. So let's go ahead and dive into, the modeling results. I did want to mention these modeling results are a little contrived. They're basically representing the Appendix G consumptions from a prototype for a secondary school. And the proposed design consumptions that are entered here are basically set up to show 10% savings, except for end uses that are unregulated, because in unregulated end uses, we should not be seeing a difference in consumption from the Appendix G model to the proposed model. So otherwise, for end uses that are regulated, I've just set this up so that it's going to show 10% savings. So it's not actual modeling results. It's just it's a little bit of a contrived result, but I think it illustrates how the tool works rather well. So we'll go into the detailed results tab. So again, your code year is reflected up here, so you know you're in the right code year. Now this tab has basically two main parts to it. One is all these calculations that look at end use factor adjustments and those fuel change adjustments that Phil talked about. And then over here on the right-hand side, we basically see a graphical representation of these things and some tables. There's energy consumption tables here. There's energy savings table right here. And then down below that, you'll see some savings bar charts. And you can see I've got these all set to be 10%. So they're all nice and happy and positive, which I know doesn't always happen with projects. And then these pie charts show some percent savings by end use at the bottom. So those things can be a little helpful in visualizing the data and seeing where maybe if you're checking your model results to see if there might be problems. So I want to focus in on this information over here. This table has three sections to it. The first section is all about the end use factors. The building types that you selected are reflected up here. We only have school, so we've only got this first column of end use factors is going to be the same as our average. This is an area weighted average over here in this column. So you'll see all of these numbers basically match the numbers over here. So this is all about end use factors. This section here is important to note that it is all in units of kilowatt hours and therms. This third section over here is all in kBTUs. So that's a key thing to think about as you're analyzing how this tool is doing its calculations. This column here is simply a reflection of the input values from your model. And this is the proposed model results, simply reflected again. And these end use factor adjusted Appendix G consumptions are simply these values times these. So we're trying to lay this out in a very sequential set of calculations, so it's really easy to follow. The program baseline, that's your kind of your prescriptive consumption baseline against which your proposed model is being measured to generate savings. These values come from what's going on in this table over here on the right-hand side. Again, you see this is all kBTUs. So you see proposed results here in kBTUs to calculate the percent of each fuel type. Now I want to go back and say I've got space heating here as green for electricity and space heating by natural gas is in yellow. And you can see for this particular example, we don't have any electric heating. I set this one up so the proposed model matches the Appendix G gas heating. But we'll show one where that's switched so you can get an idea of how that looks. So again, yeah, proposed is simply used to calculate our percent of each fuel type. And then these values here, again, are just the reflected values from this column, but in kBTUs. Now, Phil mentioned those fuel adjustment factors, which are essentially a COP. Currently, the MSW is using the end use factors or COPs here that are listed. So of primary interest is for this heating end use. You can see for electricity in green, the COP assumed is 2.0. And for gas, it's 80%. If you happen to have an absorption chiller for the space cooling end use, come talk to us. We'll talk about these end use factors for that kind of a project. But you can also see down here in service water heating that you've got some, 1 for electric resistance water heating, and again, 80% for gas heating. So those are the fuel adjustment factors Phil was talking about. These are used to back calculate basically a program baseline from the adjusted Appendix G values. So these are these are essentially a load. Then what this column does here, the program baseline, is it uses this load value with these again and the percents split between the fuel types for that end use, and it calculates a new kBTU value for those fuel types. And again, these values are kBTUs, and they're just reflected back here in this column in kilowatt hours and therms. So let's go on to the third example real quick with the different fuel uses. Again, I've got the electric heating in green, the gas heating in yellow, and you can see clearly the proposed model has electric heating. The Appendix G, these are both still gas heating, and gas heating at this step here, which is just the adjusted Appendix G value by the EUF. But here in the program baseline, you can see how the switch happens. Instead of getting gas results here, we're getting electric results here. And then these values, again, go back to this program baseline tab, and they're converted back to kilowatt hours and therms. So this would be the scenario you might want to, if you're not quite sure exactly what's going on with these fuel changes, you can go in here and set up a scenario like this where you can look at it and follow the algebra in a fairly straightforward fashion. I did set up something that I hope is useful. Some arrows that kind of follow the calculations. End use factors are used along with the Appendix G consumptions to get adjusted, EUF adjusted Appendix G. The proposed model kilowatt hours go to here and give us the percent of each fuel and the end uses that might be impacted by this fuel switching. And then all the appropriate calculations happen here in the red to determine the program baseline, which then follows the purple arrow and goes back to here to give you your final program baseline against which your proposed model is measured to determine savings. So I know this is a lot, and that kind of gets to the end of the live demo, but we got lots of time for questions and answers. And again, I'll stress, if you have results that you're getting for your EMSW that you don't understand, or you would like additional support in understanding the tool outputs, reach out to your outreach manager. Our engineering team is eager to help in any way we can.
We did get some great questions, so let's just jump right in. The first one, and I know that we've talked about this a couple times, but someone asked, if they get really stuck with their EMSW, like maybe it's having tech issues or they're not quite sure what to do with the new format, what do they do? Like what's their first thing they should do?
Any questions or issues that you think you're having is going to be go to your outreach manager and request a meeting with the engineers. And we can generally arrange a call pretty quick if we need to talk about it. Email can be another great way if it's something a little simpler. So we want to be there for you. We want to make sure that this tool is working well for everybody. Bill, any other ideas?
That's what I would have said. Yeah, reach out to your outreach manager, and if needed, they might even be able to set up a call with engineering. We could, and it might be Corey or I who end up talking with you and walking you through any solution to any kind of issue you're having with the EMSW.
Yep, that's great. And your outreach manager, like myself, may even be able to help you without setting up a call with engineering. It might be something we can troubleshoot for you. And if not, then we'll reach out to Corey and Phil and see if it's something that we want to set up. I got a question just this morning from an engineer that we're gonna troubleshoot about the MSW that we're going to troubleshoot later this afternoon. So definitely reach out, and we're always going to be happy to help. So another question we got is they asked if the Future Ready building technical assistance is part of the previous technical assistance limits, or if the incentive funding is on top of that. And I can take that one. It's actually a separate pot of funding. So the Future Ready Building Technical Assistance is a whole different pot of funding. So we have the 60% up to 40,000. That includes the energy modeling, the daylighting study, passive system CFD analysis. That pot is staying exactly the same as it has been. The Future Ready Building Technical Assistance pot is its own new pot of money that of incentive funding that is available in addition. So definitely feel free to reach out to myself or your outreach manager if you'd like to know more about that. All right, so here's another question for you guys. Phil, maybe you want to take first crack at this one. They said, I'm assuming that the EMSW will automatically adjust the targets for various tiers based on the model results. Is that correct?
That's right. There may be an adjustment like that done. So early on, before you have model results, you, like Corey showed, you enter some information about the building on the project description tab, like the building type and the programming in terms of area for each building type and the location, via the zip code. And you may need to put in the zero tool results as well if it's not one of those common building types that we mentioned. At that point, the EMSW would generate a code minimum EUI expected for that building type, as well as target EUIs for each of the incentive tiers. And then once the model results are generated, once you have your Appendix G baseline and proposed model scenarios created, and you've simulated those and put that output into the EMSW, there may be an additional adjustment done by the EMSW to scale the targets so that they're still appropriate for the output of the models. Because early on, before we have modeling results, the EMSW tool is only making a prediction, like a best guess of what those UI targets might be based off of past program experience with those building types um, and prototype models. And so the EMSW may need to do an additional adjustment after the modeling results are entered. And that's why Corey was showing in the live demo. Once the model results are entered, you'll want to look to the savings and incentives tab of the EMSW to see what the incentive targets are for your project.
All right, thank you. Thank you. And some of these questions kind of overlap. So just kind of dovetailing off of that one. And I think you may have touched on this, but maybe you can kind of dig in a little deeper. Phil, I think I'm going to stick with you on this one, but can you share what's been used as the basis for determining the end use duration factors?
Sure. So those come right from a Department of Energy tool. It's called the Appendix G Compliance Companion Tool. And, in the slide portion of the presentation, I mentioned that, and but I want to make it clear, you don't have to use that Department of Energy companion tool to participate in our offering. We don't need to see it. That's just the source for where those end use adjustment factors are coming from. And so, yeah, that's from a Department of Energy Appendix G compliance companion tool.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, and so Corey, I think you might be, or maybe, I mean, I'll let you guys decide. But here's one. So what about a mixed use project that doesn't fit into the building type list? How would we set EUI targets for this building type? And I think, Corey, you were talking a little bit about like custom EUIs. Like, how does that process work?
Yeah, great question. So if you have a multi-use building, the first thing to consider is, is there a way to divide it in such a way that some of the building types are pretty clearly defined? Um, that should not be too much trouble to enter the tool. But the challenge might come when you have a building type that's not really clear, like a natatorium is a classic example. That's a difficult one to characterize. It's got process loads that are very different than any of the the prototype building types. So in those cases, that's where the CBEX information becomes very important. And so in those cases, if you don't have at least portions of the building that are like, hey, this is clearly an office, but we've got a natatorium section too. If you have that, you can divide the square footage of that office into its own building type for office. And then for the remainder of the building, you might choose all others. And then it's going to ask for CBEX information for both building types. If you choose to, one building type is office for part of the square footage, and another building type is all others to represent the natatorium part. Once you have any building type in that list that requires CBEX information, you have to provide it for all the building types. So in that case, it'd be a matter of, you could run the zero tool to get the office CBEX information from the zero tool and enter that. And then for something like a natatorium, we've worked with projects on determining EYs for complex buildings like that that don't have great representation, and we're flexible about where we can get that information from. Their CBEX, there might be individual design firm experience with particular building types, things like that. We're willing to work with the teams to determine what those CBEX inputs might be.
Great, great, thank you. I bet there's people breathing a sigh of relief out there right now. So here's one, Corey, I might stick with you on. For projects that are currently registered under 2019 and 2021 code that have not yet received an incentive reservation letter, so they haven't been committed through the program, will the renewable energy generation still be eligible to count towards the whole building incentives, or will they be excluded for their EUI?
Okay, great. Yeah, to state clearly, renewable systems are still eligible for incentives through the Energy Trust Oregon solar program, which is not our program. So incentives for that system as it, as a PV system are still available. Our program previously was only using renewables contributions to knock that EUI down to see if you could get to that path to net zero target. So we didn't offer incentives per se directly for the PV, but we did offer a higher incentive rate if that PV helped get your building to to the path to net zero target EUI. Whether a project, all projects that need to use the new 2025 form, they'll need to use it, and PV will no longer be a contributing factor to the EUI of the achieved tier. And generally, projects that have not submitted modeling results in an old version of the EMSW before about March of this year, those projects will be required to be on the new EMSW. Projects that before that time sent us the old legacy EMSWs with modeling results in them will stay on those older forms, which includes the whole contribution of PV towards accomplishing your net zero target. So the important thing is to remember the new form, the new EMSW, has a whole new way of calculating incentives from the old legacy forms. I hope that helps.
Yeah, so it really comes down to, have we received your model results or not yet?
Yeah, as of late February. Yeah, if we
As of
got
late
model
February.
results by that period, then you'll stay on the old version of the EMSW. If we didn't get model results after that or before that, then you'll be on the new EMSW. And that cutoff roughly coincides with whether, I won't say that. I was going to talk about incentive reservation letters, but you're more of an expert on those than I am, Ellen.
Yeah. So it's less about when we commit the project and more about when we received your model.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. That's a nice clarification. So Phil, I think I'll ask you this one. Can you explain why using the Appendix G baseline is important?
Sure. So the entire whole building offering is structured around that performance rating method pathway of code. Performance rating, Appendix G is like another name for the performance rating method. It's more commonly called Appendix G because that's the section of 90.1 where it's defined. And so, you know, to participate in the whole building offering, the energy models need to be created in compliance with the Appendix G rule set. You know, I don't know if the question is really about this, but the program chose to align with the performance rating method to, to hopefully to take some burden off of modelers and project teams and the amount of energy models they might need to create. So the idea was that, you know, you could submit the same energy models that to Buildings Codes Division to demonstrate compliance that you could submit to our program to you know, receive incentives, or to maybe other above code programs that are available. For example, something like LEAD. You know, the idea was to streamline that, to have one consistent modeling approach across all of those. And also there, you know, there were hopes that energy modeling softwares would provide features to help with the creation of the Appendix G baseline. Since it's stable now across all the code years, um, the hope was that energy modeling software tools would, you know, they'd be operating under one stable rule set to create the baseline going forward, and they might provide features in their software to help a modeler generate that baseline. So they might need to only create a proposed model scenario for their building design, and the energy modeling software might help with creation of the Appendix G baseline. So those were some of the reasons why the program aligned with the performance rating method. But yeah, to be clear, the energy models that you're submitting to participate in the whole building offering, those need to have been created in accordance with ASHRAE 90.1 Appendix G that corresponds to the 90.1 version that corresponds to the Oregon Energy Code that you're permitting under.
Thank you, Phil.
Sure.
Uh, that was a thorough answer. So Corey, we have a question about the tiers of the different levels. So it says, where on the savings and estimates tab can we see the EUI targets for various tiers and for the model results?
Let's see. That is exactly where you will see them, is on the savings and incentives tab. The tiers are shown on the chart that's there, and it gives the numbers, and it's a bar chart. It's kind of hard to do a quick screen share. So
Are we able to pull the screen share back up?
Yeah, we can pass that along. Annie, you want to pass that over to Corey?
let's see, we're on the fly here now.
Yeah, that's
Hey,
great.
okay. So obviously you have the per kilowatt hour per therm incentive dollar rates are here, and the tiers are shown in this graphical representation right here. The efficient tier, that's the whole building efficient. The minimum level, 5% better than your baseline model results, or better than the equivalent program baseline from your Appendix G model. You've got the high performance, the middle tier with the EUI here, and then the path to net zero target is shown down here. So that is where you'll see the final targets that are dependent upon putting in the model results into the tool.
Okay, so that's what the program will use then to determine what the incentive amounts will be based on the tiers.
Exactly.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you guys can answer this one, but I thought it was a great question. I don't know. It says, in general, what % of projects meet their initial goal below baseline? Have we ever done analysis of that?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, offhand, I don't know if I have a great sense of
Yeah.
that.
I think the majority.
I would say majority do hit it. We have had cases where projects weren't able to achieve the minimum 5% threshold, and even when that happens, um, it doesn't mean that the project is necessarily locked out from receiving any incentives from Energy Trust. You know, might be that they have to drop out of the whole building offering, but there might still be opportunities through some of the other program pathways for them to like continue participating in the new buildings program. But yeah, I don't have a great, I definitely don't have like a hard number to share or even really a great sense of that, other than to say what you said, Ellen, like the majority do achieve the whole building, the minimum efficient, the minimum incentive tier. I guess there's a good chance to add, if you put your results into the, put your model results into the EMSW, and you see that it pops up right away as saying, you know, didn't achieve the minimum, and you're, you know, you're certain like you're doing above code energy efficiency measures in your project. Don't just give up right there. You know, reach out to us. We want to hear about that. We want to see if there's maybe something that's been misentered, or maybe there's some issue with the EMSW that we need to be made aware of. So we'd ask you in those cases, you know, we've been saying this a lot, but reach out to us. Let you know, we can work with you on those. We'd be curious to find out more about those scenarios too.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Phil. So if someone enters it and it just doesn't feel right, you know, like that gut check is not jiving, they should reach out to myself, outreach manager, and we can have them work with you to dig in a little deeper and just make sure that everything's right. And I did also want to just touch a little further on what something you said, which is if even after that they look deeper and the project is not meeting the 5% requirement for whole building, we do have other pathways, and we do have other ways to get incentives for the project. So you know, there is an off ramp that leads to incentives still for the project. So we absolutely want to continue to work with you and make sure that the project still gets incentives. So definitely, it's not a failure of any kind. It's just a way to move to a different track. Um,
And Ellen, I'm sorry, we might also add that in those rare cases, which those are pretty rare occurrences
yeah,
in the
it
program,
is rare. Yep,
that you know, we still do honor the technical assistance for the model construction at least, and then there's the additional pathways of standard incentives that you were mentioning. So
absolutely.
so the modeling effort is not left high and dry incentive wise.
Yep, good point. Thank you. Um, so we had a question here, and I thought it was a good one. I would love your perspective on, you know, how does someone know if energy modeling is a good fit for a project? Like what's the value that energy modeling brings?
Sure. For one, especially with new construction, it's a way to explore alternatives, especially like early in the design when you're considering um, measures or ways you might achieve um, ultimately like a low EUI for your building. Energy modeling is like a great way to explore those different scenarios. There is some uh, effort in creating the initial model, but once you have it, you can run proposed scenarios off of that and see impacts. So that's one benefit of using energy modeling as a design assistance tool. As far as recommendations for which projects are best fit for it, we don't limit which projects can participate in the whole building offering. So energy modeling, I mean, it's really useful on buildings that are going to have multiple measures that have interactions. It may make more sense for larger or energy intensive buildings, just to make the level of effort in creating the model worth it in terms of what is going to be gained in energy savings. But related to that, we don't have any hard restrictions on, a building type needs to be this size or it needs to be of this type to participate.
Yeah, thank you. And outreach managers also have a good kind of compass that can help you as well. If you want to talk to us, we're happy to help you kind of weigh that decision.
Yeah, Corey, do you have anything to add to that response?
Well, I could, yeah, if you're using, I mean, energy models are there to help you refine design. I think their biggest value comes in the early design stages when you're trying to lay out, make big decisions, gas versus electric, heavy insulation versus code insulation, and you can look at the costs. I think it's great. And utility costs are not getting any cheaper, and we're looking at probably a horizon of seeing things like demand charges have more of an impact on operation of buildings. So having a better idea of exactly how much energy your building is going to consume, and looking even at the demand profiles of a building to see where you might lie in those demand charge rates, and beginning to think about considering things like that, a model can really help you with those sorts of things. That's what our future ready buildings technical assistance offers are aimed towards. And even basic things like sizing your equipment. Are you right sizing your equipment? Are you making sure that you're not over investing in size? Can be another benefit. Or if you can look at the trade-offs of increased insulation, and can you bring the size down of the equipment and save a little money that way, or have a nice trade-off with the saved utilities in addition to less capital costs on smaller equipment. That something like that might pencil out for an owner who's more forward thinking, and maybe they're going to own the building for 30 or 40 or 50 years, and that's going to be a much more important thing for them. Modeling can certainly help with those types of decisions. It can help validate traditional design sizing exercises and things like that.
Yeah, great points. Thank you both very much. Well, I think we're getting close to our time. I thought if you could just kind of bring us home with a few closing thoughts. Do you have any kind of last thoughts to about today's presentation that you'd like to leave the group with? How about Phil?
I hope this presentation is useful to y'all, and looking forward to working with you, and participating in the program. And I'll just say it once more, reach out to us if you have any further questions on the EMSW or the whole building offering. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Phil. And Corey?
I think Phil kind of said it. I'll echo the point that if you see in the MSW that it looks like the initial results are not looking great for some reason, reach out to us. This is a new tool. It's a new code. We're keeping a close eye on it to make sure that everything is working as it should be. So just reach out to us if you see anything that looks funny or unexpected.
Thanks, Corey.